Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is just after 2:30 on Friday, January 31st, 2025. We are getting close to the end of the Budget Adjustment Act. We have two more pieces of language to take a look at, and we're going to take a look at a draft of the web report, not the final one. We're going to have Emily and Maria talk about that and tell you about a different one, and then we will, given that Rev Kosenska is available around 3:30, that's when I'd like to have the final discussion and vote about the budget adjustment, because we will have looked at all the pieces at that point. So that's what my thinking is. Any questions? We good on that so far? Okay. So what Grady handed out is on two sides. We'll take the easier one that we've already talked about first, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. This is the 8.6 million provide support and capacity for the production and preservation of affordable mixed income rental housing and homeownership units, including improvements to manufactured homes and communities, permanent homes and emergency shelter for those experiencing homelessness, recovery residences, and housing available to farm workers, refugees, and individuals who are eligible to receive Medicaid-funded home and community-based services. So this is the language that we had in the budget last year, and we're just repeating it. Is everybody okay with that language? Dave and
I am.
Lynn, any questions? You guys good? Lynn, you're on mute, I think, Lynn. You're good. Okay. I'm going to take that as a good. All right. Okay. So the other side, Grady, do you want to explain this one?
Sure thing. Yeah. So Grady Nixon, Joint Fiscal Office. This would be a new section relating to the Child Care Contribution Special Fund. This would be intent language to ensure that there is a balance in the fund to support the future establishment of a reserve for the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, CCFAP. This is following the recommendation of the Treasurer's report. So there's $8 million currently in the fund. The Treasurer recommended that balance be left in the fund until more information, more experience is available to determine the appropriate reserve amount for the fund. So this is intent language that the General Assembly aims to maintain a balance of unreserved and unallocated balance in the fund for that purpose.
Yes, Jim.
What does this language do in terms of the transfers and reversions that we've done? I have heard pushback that, in the scheme of some funds, in terms of reserve purposes, it's less than 100 million at the most, and that it doesn't warrant a separate reserve fund. And I thought we satisfied that language that concern by indicating that there would be, it would fall back to the AHS reserve fund for the caseload. So why go through that exercise if we're setting up a separate reserve? I think that number was like 8 million or something. What happens to the numbers we've already talked about?
So this would be intent language just to establish that the General Assembly is considering establishing a reserve in the future.
We may consider stuff. So it's a separate, and Emily can probably correct me when I'm wrong on all of this.
It doesn't say may, it says shall.
No, the money that's in there shall remain in the Child Care Special Fund.
Okay, so even if the caseload doesn't warrant it, that money has to stay there.
Yes, but because we're putting money into that from payroll taxes. We can't pull money out of it. We can't pull money out of a special fund and use it for any other purpose than that for which it was intended. So we don't pull money out of liquor and lottery and use it for, and that's not a good one because that's not a price fund. Never mind.
We do.
A lot.
Pull money out of fish and wildlife and, and give it to child. Mike?
I want to offer my support for this because I've seen all too many times over the years where a pot of money gets put over here And the pot of money starts to diminish over here, and the next thing you know, their hands starting to sweep across the table and scoop it up. And a lot of us have worked long and hard in childcare to try and finally get some dedicated money towards that. I think it's important for people to know that the money that's coming out of their paychecks, the money that people took advertisements out about me in the last election for supporting is going to go to what it's intended for.
But you can't take money out of a special fund and use it for anything other than what was in the special fund.
But we're not. You're asking for a reserve.
You're not establishing a reserve. But we may in the future establish a reserve if we need to establish a reserve.
Says any money left over shall.
Remain in the fund.
Sure.
Emily, would you like to come to the table?
Yeah, hopefully I can help. So I think no money is this just, if you recall in the FY 2024 budget, right? Some money was moved into the fund, about $8 million of general funds, right? Just in case there was because it's a new program, we don't know, right? And that money was moved and the language said, the treasurer's office per their reserve study will look at whether or not a reserve is necessary in this fund. The treasurer's office report came back and said, we don't have enough experience with this program to be able to say whether or not a reserve is required and necessary in the fund. One of the pieces of language that's been put forward is to allow the utilization of the Human Services caseload reserve right now in the event that we get to the end of the fiscal year and the revenue hasn't performed or the expenses exceed the revenue that comes into the fund. So that would give the Finance and Management Commissioner the ability to move the Human Services caseload reserve over. And the only way that would happen, right, is if that $8 million that went into that fund is also completely utilized to balance, based on revenue coming in under or expenses coming in over, right? So that would that allows that sort of transaction to happen. This language says, to the extent that $8 million is there when we get to year end and you haven't had to use the Human Services caseload, it stays there, right? The treasurer's report said, you don't have enough experience. So we can't really tell you whether or not a reserve should exist in this fund or not. This just says, the intent is to look into the future establishment of the reserve. And until that work has been done, the money stays in that fund, not officially reserved, right? An official reserve is not being created through this language in the special fund. It's just saying, hold it there, which is, I think, normal for special funds, right? Special funds have money in them or they don't, and the money just sits there. This is just intent to say, leave it there until there can be further conversation around whether or not an official reserve should be established sometime in the future. Does that make any sense? Great.
Yes, I know what you're saying. I'm waiting until you say,
Creating a
okay.
hole in the fiscal year 26 budget, if the expenses come in such that, the general fund appropriation for childcare is not needed, but we can't use all the money that's coming into the childcare fund because we have to put some of that aside for reserve.
So this doesn't require you to put it into a reserve.
And then why do we have the word shall?
This is that the money in the fund shall just stay in that fund, right? And it's just intent language, right? So I think there's been some discussion about once the money goes into a special fund, it can never come out, which is not technically true, right? The General Assembly can always not withstand any special fund and move it.
Establishment's a little squishy.
Yep.
Being subject to appropriation. Already I'm a little grumpy. I apologize.
No?
Okay, Wayne.
Fair question.
I don't know if I should try to help. My thought was around the fact that the treasurer doesn't have enough data to do it. I was just thinking of a clause until such time as.
Yeah.
Why is this even needed if it's the future establishment of a reserve? If we want to put a $10 million reserve, we can do that. So I guess it just begs the question, is this window dressing to satisfy some people in this building? Sorry, I'm not. You're doing your job. Thank you.
I think, Lynn, do you have your hand up?
Yes, yeah. Okay, my understanding earlier in the week, last week, was that when this whole thing came up about the 13 million here and the 13 million there, and you know, the amount of money that we had put in and the amount of money that was a shortfall in the revenue and then the underutilization, my understanding was that that we were going to go and get language that allowed whatever this money was that was put aside, maybe not to be used for anything else, but put aside in the Agency of Human Service caseload reserve, which is what we do with Medicaid. And that was what I thought we were going to have language for, which meant that it was still going to be available to be used in case the revenue didn't show up or the expenses were higher, but it would be put into this caseload reserve or use that caseload reserve. I have seen special funds used for things that they were not originally intended, with notwithstanding several years of it in some cases. So I know that special funds can be swept out and used for other things. Sometimes they go to the general fund. So I'm sort of concerned about what I was told or what we said publicly in committee, that it was going to be used for this Human Services caseload reserve. And now this language comes out is, are we not going to use the caseload reserve from Agency of Human Services? Or are we going to set up a separate reserve? Or what exactly, are we going to just do nothing with this money? It just goes in the fund and stays there until we actually see what happens in July 15th.
I think there is a lot of uncertainty around this fund, just in terms of how expenses will actually perform and how revenue will actually perform. And I think this is sort of acknowledging that it is possible that there's both the money that was transferred last year, and it's possible that the revenues come in higher than anticipated and expenses come in lower. If that's the case, this is sort of indicating that any of that positive balance would stay there, right? Including the 8 million that was moved or whatever is left of that, right? Because there also is a scenario where the balance of the revenue and expenditures means that some of that money that was moved last year is spent, right? Because that's how the expenses and the revenue shook out, right? There is also a scenario where revenue comes in less and expenses come in higher, in which case it would drive the fund into the red. And that's when you would tap the Human Services caseload reserve, is to bring it back to zero. So this is sort of like
The other side.
all of the scenarios possible, right?
Okay,
So we do have language, Lynn, that says that we can use the human case, I keep calling it the wrong thing, Human Services caseload reserve. That was like, I'm not sure that you were on this morning, but we talked about that. I can't remember. Yesterday?
Yes.
okay.
So we have language
have
that
that.
says that we're allowed to use the Human Services caseload.
So then
And
this
so-
is added language that says we shall, at some point, maybe in the future, set up a child care reserve, fund reserve,
If we need to.
if we need to. Okay.
And we may
Okay.
not ever need to. It's just that we don't know and.
Okay. Okay. Well, that is clear to me now. Thank you.
Okay. Is this clear to you, Jen? Okay. So we are not setting up a special reserve fund within this special fund, health fund.
Just trying to remember what Tom Cavett said, and I think he referred to his sense, it would take about 18 months for us to really know what's happening with this.
Yeah, I think 18 to 24 months which is typical of any new program that we stand up, right? We don't really know where anything's gonna be. So any other comments on that? Are people okay with inserting this language?
I'm not, but it may be a minority one. I don't know that it's necessary. We can do it 2 months from now if we feel strongly about setting up a reserve and we know more information. We're just saying now it's the intent, whatever that means. Yeah,
Okay.
whatever. I'll get over it.
You may get snowed in here tonight, Jim.
Anybody else have any comments about this that they want to add?
And my thought was, until such time as enough information was available to allow the treasurer to determine.
So like adding another,
Just a clause.
a clause, I don't know, does
But
that, I don't know enough about these to know, does that make sense to add any sort of a clause, or are we getting too much?
While the joint fiscal office was drafting this, adding a clause similar to that was considered, and we determined simplest language would be best.
Okay.
I also think the treasurer is not typically the one who determines whether or not I think they are consulted and they are part of the conversation, but the treasurer is not typically the entity that would make that decision.
And I wouldn't be advocating for it.
Just leave it the way it is. Okay. Okay. All right, we will add this. Looks to be enough people in the committee that want to add this. We'll do that. All right, let's do a few minutes of the web report and then we'll talk about the whole bill.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the record, Maria Blair, Joint Fiscal Office, what's being passed around is just it's an early draft. We thought it was done, but then the committee has added $11 million. And then, no, that's okay. And then there may be the VITA dollars. But what I wanted to show you quickly, for the people especially the people that haven't seen a web report, this is a document that we produce every year for both the adjustment bill and the big bill. And what it shows you are the dollar changes in the budget. And for the budget adjustment bill, it just shows the sections where there's a change from the budget that was passed last May. And you'll see, for instance, the first section, B105 ADS, this is where the governor proposed these changes that you have discussed in the context of this big spreadsheet that you had. But what this shows you is what the budget was as passed back in May, then the governor's changes that he's recommending, then the new governor number, and then the next column is for any house change, and then you have the final house number. And when you go to the floor with the bill, this final column is going to be what we use to create the number section of the budget. So these numbers actually correspond with the bill directly. So I'm just going to show you, first there's personal and services operating. Some of these sections have grants as well. And then that's the expense total. And then underneath that is the source of funds for each section. So the B105, you'll see it has general funds, special funds, and internal service funds. So if we can go to the first page where there's a change, it's page 2. Up at the top, section B205, which is state's attorneys. And as you recall, this committee made 2 changes to that section. And so you can see it in the House change, that's a net number of 191,230 down from the governor. And that number is made up of 2 things. You'll see a little comment underneath. House comment, first you added 45,270 to update costs of court-ordered mental health valuations. And then there was a reduction of 236,500 for the SLA costs. And that was included in that memo that we got from the state's attorney's office. So that's the first place where there's a change. Then just for your information, on page 3, sort of just above the middle is a function total for protection to persons and property. So for all these sections, whatever changes occur, you'll see those reflected in the function total. And in this case, there was only 1 change in protection, and that totaled 191,230 that we just discussed. All right. So then the next is that.
Did you get that so far? Good? Okay.
So now what we're going to do is the next set of changes, you've got to flip all the way back to page 12. In the bottom right-hand corner is their page numbers. So if you go to page 12 of 16, at the bottom it says Treasurer's Office, one-time appropriations. And in this section, the governor had $14 million in the grant line, that's general funds, and then this committee removed those dollars. And so that's what you see in this section. And then if you go to the next section, B1100D, that's Vermont Department of Health, one time.
So we've now moved out of the regular part of the budget and the base part.
That's true,
It's
yes,
1,100, so everything here is one-time money.
yes. So when you go to this B1100D, you'll recall that the governor had $4 million in there for the Vermont Department of Health contingent sustainability grants. And this committee decided to remove those dollars. And so you'll see that in the House change column, and you'll also see a comment underneath that section that says House, $4 million down. And then a little bit later, we'll see where you address the $10 million that you used instead of that. But the next section where there's a change is right underneath that. It's 1100E DCF one time. And this committee added this $1,840,304 in the House change column, and that is to extend the cold weather exemption through June. And then if we go down to the, not the next column, not the next one, that doesn't have any changes in it, but if we go to the next page, the very bottom of 13 has the title B1100O Diva one time, but all the information's at the top of the
That
next.
is a lot, and I can't find something because it
Yeah,
cuts the page at a funny spot.
yeah, no, that's true. And so this is where you address the $10 million that you appropriated for the provider stabilization grants. And then underneath that, section B1100W is Vermont Housing Conservation Board. And you do 2 things in this section. They both add up to $11,400,000. The first one of those is the $2.8 million for the pilot project completion. And the second item is $8.6 million just for Housing Conservation Board for housing initiatives that you just discussed in the language section that Grady and Emily went over with you. Let's see. And then I think that's it. I think that's all we've got in this draft that's in front of you. But I wanted you to see what a web, what the web report looks like.
Works.
Yeah, and so we post this once it's complete. It gets posted, and it's one of the floor documents that we hand out in support of the budget. So when you go to the floor, I think there'll be some hard copies for some people who like hard copies, but a lot of this will just be posted on the Joint Fiscal Office webpage, and then I think also on the committee webpage, so that anybody can access it.
So the only thing I'm not seeing, and maybe I just missed it, Maria, is the judiciary, the 850,000.
So that's in language, that's a good call. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, because that was language that was amended and it changed the use of those funds, and you'll see that in the language sections, and Grady probably can tell you what section it's in, but yes, that's all in language. That's not in these sections of the budget.
Okay,
Yeah, when we get.
so not even as one time.
No, not even as one time. It's, so we took an old appropriation from a few years ago and we said, spend 800,000 less
Right.
one case, but instead spend the 800,000 on this wiring and security.
But that's coming out of the 14 million.
Yes, but see, the thing about that is that the governor took the 850 total reversions. And so from the governor, you got to compare yourself to the governor. If you're not going to revert that money and put it on the bottom line, compared to the governor, you've got to find 850,000. And so that's why when you calculated how you're going to use the 14 million, you had to include that because you're actually spending more than the governor by 850. Does that make sense?
I trust you to do it right.
Okay, I mean,
That's right, it's gotta go. This is like one of those things that
it's not that straightforward, but you're comparing yourself to the governor. The governor spent all the money, including that reverse 850. And so if you're saying, okay, give the judiciary back the 850, you've got to find 850. And so when you went through your 14 million, you accounted for the 850 in that. And so where it shows up is in this language section, not in the numbers section. And so it's not straightforward. I understand.
It totally isn't, but as long as everybody gets their money and the numbers work out, that's.
Yes, okay, cool.
Okay,
Good, good.
thank
So
you.
we'll go and make the changes.
Okay, and I think we have Tom. before-
Oh, sorry.
I have a different reversion question. I asked this a couple of days ago, and this is about reversions from the legislature that totaled 800, according to Scott Moore, it totaled $813,000, and I didn't see it in the reversion list.
I think,
And
is that in the 26 bill? Is that?
Reversions in the 26 bill.
and what he said to me today was that there's reversions in the 26 bill for like 121,000.
They should be on that list.
And then, but this, at least alphabetically or numerically, these reversions are not. There's 5 reversions for a total of 813.
They should be on there. I think sometimes where maybe you won't see them is when we're amending a bigger section. So if nothing is changing in those reversions, the language itself may read in such a way where you don't hear because we're amending the session law. That's not right, Brady. Yes. We can let's look at it.
Yeah, you can look it up and I just don't want there to be, not that it's money that's floating around, I just want to make sure it's accounted for.
We can show you, it's
And the bill is passed?
the bill is passed. Right?
Yeah,
So it's like,
yes.
we have the bill is passed, the Act 113, which will show those reversions, those 800,000. But we amend that section through the Budget Adjustment Act.
Okay, so this is already been, what you're saying is that it's likely that this was already passed.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
All right, so this is irrelevant to me now.
Yeah, if you go online, if you look up.
That's okay, it's sitting there and I'm like, I can't find it.
If you go online and look up Act 113, that's on our Joint Fiscal Office webpage, or else, on the legislative webpage, and you go to the list of reversions, there'll be a legislative, and that's where you'll find it. So that's the bill that's passed.
That's in the budget, not in the budget adjustment.
Right.
Exactly. And that's a very great question, because people get confused about that all the time.
Including Scott.
Well, yes.
Actually, he probably wasn't confused.
He is accurate. In the current fiscal year, there's whatever the number is that he gave you that's being reverted. That's true.
Right, no, and I may have asked the wrong question. He sent this information to me I expected to see it in the
Yeah.
BAA, just out of
Yeah.
a new habit growing, that like if someone. I should believe them.
Okay,
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of interesting that for a new person to start, because we're starting in the middle by doing the budget adjustment, because you haven't been through a whole budget cycle yet. And then you come back and you say, oh yeah, I remember when we did that. You're starting in the middle, and that's always hard. So, anyway,
Yes.
you're doing a great job. Asking good questions. All right, okay, thank you. So, JFO team, do we have everything from you that we need at this point? All right. Since-
Whoever puts back because.
Oh, yeah, they're wrong.
I printed them and then I heard made more decisions.
All right, they're just gonna recycle them. So committee, I told Rep. Kasansko we would get on at 3:30 to discuss, have our final discussion and vote of the budget adjustment. So letting Lynn and Dave know